Okay, so welcome to the Kudzu Crossroads, queer artists in the South. I think I just butchered that, but welcome. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder with my lovely partner, Donnie Jokum, of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division in New York City. I am not from the South, although I kind of have Southern roots. My parents were part of the Great Migration West that happened in the 40s, but their roots are in Arkansas. And my grandfather was a Southern Baptist minister, so I did experience some of the pain that the South has to offer queer people. And Donnie.
And it's not all pain, because I'm from Louisiana and I was born, I'm Cajun descent, Southwest Louisiana, grew up in New Orleans.
Oh, me too, yeah.
Oh yeah, hey.
Yeah, hey.
Not all pain, yes, some discomfort at times, but the majority of the time in Louisiana in particular, because I think of French culture and the gumbo blend of the state and New Orleans, it is its own queer, beautiful space. So yes. I've been in New York since 2000. So yeah.
Great.
So we already mentioned a little earlier, but for anyone who joined us later, Bureau is a queer bookstore, cultural center, and event space that Donnie and I founded in 2012. And we've been hosted by the LGBT Community Center on 13th Street since 2014. So we have been closed since March 13th due to the pandemic, and we definitely won't be opening anytime in 2020. We're hoping sometime in 2021. Here we are in these crazy times. But we've been doing virtual events. We've been doing 1 to 2 a week. And we now have an online store, which I posted in the chat. So that's bgsqd.com/store. And you can check out the books we have for sale, and we keep adding. So thank you very much to everyone who donated for this event. That helps us out a lot to keep doing things like this. And thank you for those of you who are buying books from us. It helps us to keep the project moving forward. So I'm going to introduce Dudrick, who initiated this event, made it happen, and then we'll get started. I'll turn the mic over to him. So, whoops, no. I love technology. Okay, Dudrick Bevins is a queer interdisciplinary artist who infuses poetry into all other forms of art, including film, fiber, painting, and publishing. He is an MA candidate at Kennesaw State College in American Studies and an MFA candidate in poetry at City College of New York. He is the author of the collaborative chapbooks Georgia Dusk with Luke Curtis at BD Studios, Pointless Thorns with Nate DeWall, Kintsugi Books, the books Vigil, BD Studios, forthcoming, and Route 4, Box 358, BD Studios. And the solo chapbook, My Feelings Are Imaginary People Who Fight for My Attention, from Poets Haven. You can follow his endeavors at dudrickbevins.com. And we're so glad to welcome Dudrick, who has also been a wonderful organizer of what was the annual Queer Comics Fair. It will be annual again.
Yes.
So
yes.
Please give a warm welcome to Dudrick Bevins.
Woo!
Put your hands together.
Woo! Thank you. Thanks, Donnie and Greg. The Bureau, Donnie and Greg, have been wonderful supporters of my work since I showed up here confused 7 years ago, wandering into the center looking for other queer folk. So they've been very kind and helpful. Thank you so much. All right. So the genesis of this project is, or this panel is in a project from my no-profit publishing endeavor, which is Kintsugi Books. Kintsugi Books seeks to find voices that exist within the cracks. So we're looking for voices of marginalized people or of people who otherwise don't generally get to be heard, because it is my belief that it is people who are in the cracks of society that are actually doing the beautiful work to hold it together, to make those cracks and those pieces come together. So one of the things I wanted to do was address the problems and the aesthetics of queer Southern folks. And over the years, starting in Georgia, I've looked at many books on queer folks in the South, of all different kinds, books on poetry, nonfiction books, everything. But what I couldn't find was a book that brought artists of all disciplines together. I wanted something that looked at, well, what is the overall aesthetic? What is the unifying principle? Or if there isn't a unifying principle, why are we talking about the South as though it is a monolithic thing? And so I put out a call, and all of the wonderful people on this panel submitted beautiful, amazing work from various disciplines: poetry, memoir. We have a filmmaker on the panel, photography. It's just everything is here. And I couldn't be happier to share the space with these wonderful folks. So I'm going to transition now to introducing our panelists. I will read a short bio on each of the 5 panelists. And panelists, if you would like to jump in with any additional information that I might have missed or that is pertinent, you just add it on right at the end, and then we'll get started. So I'm going to start with Sill Fredenburg. She is an author and filmmaker from Memphis, Tennessee. Her first book, LGBTQ+ Revolution 2.0, is a celebratory collection of narratives from queer identifying individuals who have yet to see adequate representation in traditional media, something very close to my heart. She now runs A Sign on the Door, a digital publication by and for folks who want to share in productive cultural critique. You can find her book in stores and online, and reach out to Jill at Sill Fredenburg on most social media platforms.
That was perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful. And our second panelist is Marie Hinson. Marie Hinson is an artist cultivating care and insurrection in poetry, performance, and documentary cinematography. Her recent chapbook, Please Remit My Qubits, from the operating system 2020, shakes at the lines between her trans embodiment and extractive technologies in placemaking and imagination. And if you don't know the operating system, they're a wonderful local publishing company or publishing group who provides free copies of almost everything. So plug for them, they're wonderful. In 2019, Marie debuted her first full-length site transformative performance, Stop on the Object, Move on the Image, at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Her verite documentary work focuses on portraits of artists and places. Marie's upcoming directorial debut, Frank Bay, was supported by the 2019 IFP Documentary Lab and the 2019 Chicken and Egg Nest Night Fellowship. Her first documentary feature is as a cinematographer, Queer Genius, premiered at Frameline 43.
Thank you. That's great.
Kyle Jackson is here with us. Kyle Jackson is a writer, actor, stage director, and creative teacher, originally from New Orleans, Louisiana. In 2014, his original play, Boy, was presented at the Fresh Fruit Festival in New York City. In 2015, he directed the Baltimore Annex Theater's production of Robert O'Hare's Insurrection, Holding History, which won Best Play of 2015 at the Baltimore City Paper's Best of Baltimore Awards. Currently, he serves as deputy editor of Bear World magazine, an online lifestyle magazine for the large, more hairy members of the queer community, woof woof. And he is also the host of the Bear World podcast. He received a BA in theater arts from Morgan State University, an MS in arts administration from Drillick University, and attended the British American Drama Academy's Midsummer in Oxford program in 2017.
That was great. It's probably my misspelling, but that was Drexel University.
No, that's just my dyslexia.
No, it's fine.
Thanks, Kyle.
Yes, great.
We have here with us Jeff Mann, who grew up in Covington, Virginia and Hinton, West Virginia, receiving degrees, and I love this interdisciplinarity here, in English and forestry from West Virginia University. His poetry, fiction, and essays have appeared in many publications, including Arts and Letters, Shenandoah, Willow Springs, The Gay and Lesbian Review Worldwide, Crab Orchard Review, and so on. He has published 3 award-winning chapbooks, 5 full-length books of poetry, 2 collections of personal essays, 3 novellas, 5 novels, including Salvation, a novel of the Civil War, which won a Lambda Literary Award, a book of poetry and memoir, and 3 volumes of short fiction, including A History of Bob Wire, which also won a Lambda Literary Award. In 2013, he was inducted into the Saints and Sinners Literary Festival Hall of Fame, which suits him, Saint and Sinner. He teaches creative writing at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia.
That's all right. Yep. Definitely a sinner, not a saint.
Well, I wasn't going to tell on you, Jeff. And we also have here Carly Rodriguez, whose piece I just adore. And I gave to a couple people in advance who are in the audience because I wanted them to see if the jokes were as funny in Spanish as they were in English. Carly Rodriguez is a writer, translator, and theorist from Mayagüez, Puerto Rico. Their work has appeared in an American Book Review, Rogue Agent, and AB, Autobiography Studies, and is also forthcoming in El Humor es Cosa Seria. You can totally correct me, and you should. My Spanish. A Puerto Rican anthology of humorous writing. Their geographical time is split between Georgia, Florida, and Puerto Rico. All right, those are our wonderful panelists.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you all. All right, so we're gonna move on into our questions here. And the first thing I really want to know is, to what degree does your experience as a queer person and a Southern person influence your identity, and how is that manifesting in your art and life? Kyle, I'd like you to start us off with this one, and feel free to also consider this an invitation to trouble the notion of Southernness, and to consider, I know, something very important to Carly, the global South.
Right. So just because I want to make sure that I hit everything that you said in that question, can you definitely repeat that question for me?
Of course, yeah. So how does being a queer and Southern person influence your identity, and what does that look like in your day-to-day life?
Being from Louisiana, as someone said earlier, being from New Orleans in particular, it's not the place that I would consider to be, you know, that monolithic sort of idea of what the South is, right? New Orleans is very intense, very sexual, very there's just a sexual energy that sort of exudes, you know, out into the city and into the people. Is sort of infused in us. And being from New Orleans, I've always had this idea of who I was sexually. I've always had this idea of me being a sexual being from an early age, you know, walking through the French Quarters and seeing the silhouettes of the strippers and the windows and things of that nature. So it was always sort of there. It was just about me tapping into it. Um, but there is also, you know, that piece of New Orleans being in Louisiana. It still is the South, right? And so there's this um there's this thing with, you know, being from the South where, especially in states like the deep South, Louisiana, Georgia, Mississippi, these places sort of have this, there's a religious sort of, you know, dogmatic undertone, like you should do this or you should be that or you should be this way. And so being queer and being from the South was always about me finding my voice, finding who I was, but also not just as a queer person, but as a queer person of color. And being a queer person of color adds another layer onto trying to figure out what your identity is, especially coming from the South. You know, I've had instances of, you know, racism, but I've also had instances of homophobia and colorism and all of these things thrown at me at a young age. I can remember being told that I was too dark. I can remember being told that, you know, I shouldn't say that the little boy on the TV show is cute, you know, because that's not something that boys do. But um, one thing I always tell people is that, and forgive my French a little bit here, but um, I was called a faggot before I was called a nigger, and and so that kind of stuck with me for a while. And part of the identity, part of my identity crisis through my late teens, through my early 20s, was figuring out who I was as a Black man, but also figuring out who I was as a gay man at the same time. And that intersection, that sort of like that sort of, you know, mixture of struggles, should I say, is sort of what brought me to where I am now, where being queer and being Black or not, I don't look at them as two separate. Some people say, you know, I'm Black before I'm queer, but I look at them as both a very valid part of my identity and part of my identity that I want to keep um, focusing on in my writing and my art. So being gay or queer or being from the South means a lot of things to me, and it's a very weighted thing for me, a very weighted question. It's a good question because it's always recognizing pieces of myself in whether it be through other people's art or through my own art or through learning different things. I always, there's a specific gaze that I have to try to look at it, and there's a certain level of what do you say? There's a certain level of you know, adapting that I have to do on a daily basis, code switching between different. So it's really weird sometimes, but I think I've learned how to deal with it so much that it's almost second nature to me.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you so much. I heard a lot in there that I obviously would like to respond to, but I want the other panelists to speak up and share their stories and or respond here as well. I will say one thing, Kyle, you triggered in me the thought of queer code switching, which I never considered before.
Yeah, totally.
Panelists, you don't have to raise your hands, you just jump on in.
Kyle, I can speak a little bit to being in Memphis specifically. So you mentioned how that's kind of we're like touching the deep South. And I do want to push back just a tiny bit against this idea that currently the South holds more, I guess, danger for the LGBTQ population than northern states do. And it's something that so I grew up in Memphis. I love the city, and there are definitely places where my queer identity was shielded. Like I did that for myself for safety reasons. I went to DC for grad school, and I felt, and DC is still, I guess, technically the South, but the way that they talk in DC as if the South is this monolith and people there are dumb and they're not progressive. Which, I mean, yeah, sure, the way that people vote is questionable, but like this idea that the North and sort of the middle of the country is not participating in the kind of hurt that we experience everywhere else is something that I've had to like consistently defend the South in conversation, which is really weird because when you're someone who did experience, my specific experience was I went to Catholic school and I had teachers actively clamp down on conversations regarding sexuality and gender in schools, which is like to be rejected in that way in a school setting in front of your peers is super shameful, and like I hold on to that, and I know that that also happens everywhere. So it's just I want to be the first person to kind of poke at that idea that the South is this monolith where people don't where you can't find a home because of the way that we talk about it, because that's not true. Like my best queer friends are here. They're not in the other spaces that I've gotten to go for school or for travel or any of that. I think it's all about being vocal when you're someone who has found safety to make that safe space for other people, especially kids. Because man, 16-year-old Jill could have really used an LGBT community center that didn't need me to be like a certain type of gay or a certain type of I mean, yeah, like I didn't feel gay enough for those spaces. And I think that that's really interesting too, like the way that all these things layer on each other. But thank you for sharing, Kyle, because that's huge.
Yeah, no problem. And thank you for actually poking at that, because that's something that I didn't get a chance to like really go into, but I appreciate you saying that, because in what Doug said at the beginning, you know, about the South not being a monolith, and there's so many different facets and so many different ways that people in the South communicate and talk to one another and do everything. So I definitely agree with you 100% about that. Totally.
Jeff, I'm going to call you out because I know you are also still living in the South, a native who has, you know, you said you've been at
Virginia Tech.
university since '89, right?
Yeah. Well, my South is a whole other South. I brought a show and tell hillbilly. Yeah. So I grew up in Southwest Virginia and Southern West Virginia, and I went to West Virginia University. I lived in the DC area one semester, 1985, fall of '85. I taught part-time at George Washington University. Hated it. I was this little country boy from a little town in southern West Virginia who realized he was gay and wanted to get the hell out of the mountains as fast as he could to have that big gay life in the big city that I was reading about in all the novels. And I got to DC, and I'm kind of a misanthrope. So cities are not good because there's lots of people. I got to DC and I didn't like the traffic, and I didn't like the noise, and I didn't like the commute, and people were not mannerly and friendly, and I missed my Southern food because I'm a bear and I'm obsessed with food, and I come from a family of great cooks. And I said, screw this. And I came back to West Virginia and decided I was going to have to figure out how to balance Appalachian identity with gay identity. And I see so many ways in which where I'm from has shaped me. In fact, there's very little about me that isn't a natural product of small towns in Appalachia, except the fact that I like men, and who knows where that comes from, right? And so that identity has actually been hugely important to me because most of what I've published is about that balancing act.
Marie, I want to call on you next, if you don't mind, just because I know you were a student of Jeff's, so you're familiar both with the area and him and his work.
Yeah. So I grew up in Appalachia, kind of the southeastern part. I grew up in Blacksburg and around Blacksburg, and yeah. So I was thinking about the South. There's like very different regions, like Kyle was saying, and not this monolithic thing. And so I was there up through college, and then I went to Philadelphia, and that's kind of where I found my people and came out, and then now I live in New York, and it's there's some ways that it's like less dangerous for me here. I'm queer, I'm trans, and but a couple of weeks ago I got chased out of a public bathroom, and so it just there's really different layers and levels, and I think that goes for a lot of the parts of identity and the work that I do, writing about where I'm from. Specifically, I grew up homeschooled. I was raised homeschooled, and so and in a conservative fundamentalist Christian ideology. And for a little bit, my family joined basically like a prepper cult in the mountains. And so for about 4 years, right around the year 2000, I lived there. It was really intense, and it was really intense to be like starting to be gendered in that time. And so I think that there's a lot of ways about how I was raised and the amount of time I got to spend outside of like an institution, like of school or other places, and the amount of time I got to spend in the woods and things like that. I got to kind of develop a different language with my body and with the world around me, which next to fundamentalist Christianity, and just feels really miraculous that happened. And so a lot of the writing I've been doing, at least around that, I'm actually working on a memoir project about growing up in that world, and the worlds that I made for myself. So my queer and trans identity is a lot of just interesting layers and questions about spirituality, and land and place. And I think that's really helpful when we start asking questions about like, what is the South? What is Appalachia? And importantly, I think, what is it being used for? Like, I think about one of the reasons I started writing my memoir because I read Hillbilly Elegy, and it was such a train wreck. And it's being used, and it has been used by white America to build these steps of fascism. This is what this place is, and this is where it comes from, and we are indigenous to the place, and erase a history, erase trans identity, erase a history of displacing the people who were here. So I really want to get at, in my own body and in my writing and in my place attachments, what is all that being used for? So yeah.
Marie, thank you so much for sharing that. Thinking about the layers, and then I hear in you these layers of isolation, these different kinds of separation within our different Souths. And that kind of brings us to Carly. I think you have a very interesting perspective as kind of a transplant from one South to another. And so I'd love for you to share a little bit about that.
Sure, thank you. That's actually a really beautiful way to put it. I will say that since we last spoke, I've decided that I am disidentifying from the global South as well, but I'll explain. So I struggled for a really long time whether I should submit a piece to this anthology, and I also struggled for a really long time once I'd done it, whether I should pull it, because I don't identify as an American Southern person. And the global South being this very academic, very Western term, also it's anathema to me. However, I decided to stay and stick it out and do it because I have been throughout my life and through very, at very critical moments in my life and of my development, I've been influenced by the South. I've loved in the South. My first partner was from Louisiana, and I U-hauled with her when I was only 18. And I've experienced incredible violence in the South, which is the opposite of that love, I suppose. I've also enacted violence in the South, and I've loved in the South. So this is not just something that the South has done to me. But the reason why I feel so connected to the South, and this is very particular to the question that you asked about how it influences my identity, is that the South taught me how to be a liar. It taught me how to really tap into those parts of me that are very good at mimicry. And the reason that I've became so good at that is because of survival. Entering the South from Puerto Rico, which is another violent place for queer people. That is something that the South and Puerto Rico and the Caribbean have in common, is sort of this this very strong impetus to really reject difference in favor of something more homogeneous, because that's safer. But for me, it came in the form of when I entered the South, I realized that I was no longer perceived as white, which that is my identity in Puerto Rico. I'm a white person in Puerto Rico, but I'm not a white person in the South. I was very forced to practice in the mirror how to properly look a certain way, how I could make my face contort a certain way to appear more white. I had to learn to really stretch the truth and talk about how my father is part German. So, I just say, yeah, I'm German, because I knew that just a few miles from the trailer park that I was living in, the KKK was having a meeting. And I knew the codes that I've been taught by my partner's family. We got to go pick up Carly, right? We can't just leave her there. Shit is going down. And so being 18, that was something that deeply affected me. It forced me to really make sure that I was passing all the time, physically, linguistically, culturally. And for a really long time, that felt for me almost like a second colonization. And I speak as a colonized subject, right? Puerto Rico being a colony of the United States. And that was very brutal, and it was very violent, and it was very painful. And so I look at myself today, and this is 12 years later, I'm in my 30s, 31, right? So it's been 13 years. And there's this process that I've had to engage in that's also very painful and anathema to my body, which is decolonizing myself many, many times over from my Puerto Rican identity, from my Southern identity, from my Northern identity, because I've been influenced. I was at my queerest when I was living in Amherst, and I don't think that's unusual if you've been to Amherst. I'm in tension. I'm very much in tension with the South, but I think it's a productive tension. And I think that comes across in my writing a little bit. I'm trying to work through it. So that's what I have to say.
Carly, I think everyone really spoke eloquently to the tensions that are inherent in the South, right? Like whether that is, as Jill pointed out, an incorrect narrative or a narrative that is untrue about the state of the South as a monolith, or if it's the fact that nowhere is really safe, as Marie pointed out. I think that there's this inherent tension that you have all hit on quite beautifully, which moves us now to my second question. I put a shortened version in the chat, but many years ago, the wonderful theorist Jack Halberstam gave us the term metronormativity, this belief that queer folk can only be liberated if we leave rural areas and go into the metropolitan areas. Not necessarily out of the South, but maybe from the hills of LJ, where I'm from, into Atlanta. So I'm curious now where and how we narrativize what stories we use to discuss our leaving, our staying, our arriving, or our returning to the South or from the South. And how do we do that in the art? How do we do that to ourselves and others? And then from there, I know that I make these questions too big, but from there, what is our responsibility in those stories? So let me narrow that down a little bit more. How do we tell the stories about coming, going, leaving, staying? And what is our responsibility in telling those stories through our art? Carly, you had the last question. I'm just going to go ahead and put you on the spot and let you start this one off, and then someone can jump in after Carly.
This was a tough question too. I mean, I try to prep for them, and okay, I'm just gonna give it my best shot. I'm very nomadic. I've been very nomadic in my life, and I actually have found that cities are incredibly violent, even more so than rural spaces for me. So I am just like, from an experiential perspective, I would have to catch up with sort of Halberstam and what they've been doing. I know they're still very much working on this idea of the wild. But I would say that it's the opposite. I think because Puerto Rico is an island and I'm very used to very particular sounds, and because the times that I've lived in rural areas, it's been mostly rural suburbia. Like, I'm just really comfortable with stillness. And so loudness, the rhythms of the city feel very violent to me. So I would say that I am in tension with, I'm not going to disagree with Halberstam. I do think that perhaps for most people, it is true that there is a kind of sense of liberation in going to the city where all the progressives are. But I don't think that people are the only dangers, right? Like, or the conversations that we might have with someone. I think that sometimes velocity, just the speed at which everything moves, can be very violent. And for me, I have found that queerness in a city is toxic because it's prescriptive. And so there's also this proximity to the way, to connect it back to my argument on velocity, the fact that because there's people coming in and out, there's this exchange of ideas that's happening very actively and at such a speed. What queerness is, or even what transness is, it's changing actively all the time. And it makes me feel tired, like I'm running after a signifier, trying to find a way to attach it to me in a way that makes sense and that it sticks. And so because in my own life, in the way that I love people, in the way that I think about my own work, which is very intellectual, is about ideas, and I privilege slowness. I would say that I'm in tension with metronormativity just because I think that rural spaces feel safer to me. But I know that that's not the case for everyone else, so I would love to hear what other people have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand that, and I agree with that as well. I think that is very valid. Everything that you said there is very valid. And I would like to also say that I feel what you're saying, that it's sort of intuitive to the person. Like, what is intuitive for you? Is it intuitive for you to stay, or is it intuitive for you to go? And for me, I think it was intuitive for me to go, but not because of the South. As I said earlier, me growing up in New Orleans was, it wasn't the most sexually or sheltered place in the world, right? So I saw and experienced a lot, but the thing about it is, I think the need to want to go or to leave was inside of me, and not necessarily because of anything that I was experiencing. Or if it was because of what I was experiencing, it was the way that I responded to what I was experiencing, which is why I think it's not necessarily I think sometimes the South gets a bad rap in the sense that people think that most people who are from the South want to leave the South because they're from the South. Because, oh, the South is full of, all of this, hate and this, racism and violence and homophobia and transphobia. That's why they want to get away. But as Carly said, the North can be just as violent, just in a different way. And I've seen it on both sides of that spectrum. I've seen violence, not necessarily just in the way that we think about physical violence, but also mental, emotional violence, verbal violence towards queer people in both places, just in a different way. It's same dish, different flavor. It's the same thing. And I think it's more about how people respond to those instances of discrimination and hate, how they respond to it versus where they are when they respond to it. And wherever they are when they respond to it will shape their idea of where they were. I know people who are from New York City who, they can't wait to move down south because they want space. They grew up, in tight, compacted spaces with other people, and they just want space. And that's all they can think of. But people from the South who are like, it's amazing and free and just, the energy up there and everything. So it's like, I think it's also a little bit of people not really understanding the why in what they're doing. And when you really sit back and sort of contemplate on the why is, because of your response to whatever violence it was that you were experiencing, and what that made you want to do. Did it make you want to fight, or did it make you want to flight? And in many people's cases, they leave wherever they experience that. So it's not the South. I just think it's just human experience. I think it's just the experience period that makes people either want to fight or flee. And I think from what I'm seeing, we have people like Carly. From what you're saying and the way that you speak, I see you more as a fighter. I see you as somebody who wants to be there. Yes, but some people just flee, and both of those are valid because they're valid reasons for wanting to do either one of those things. So, yeah.
If I can just jump on to what Kyle was saying, because I think that is totally true. I'm so sorry. Of course, I would get a notification as soon as I unmute. But I want to talk about this idea of responsibility, because I think that this idea of violence and how people respond to violence is really important. So I think for a lot of those layers of identity, specifically for people who are LGBT, there are so many of us who are like privileged in certain ways and then need to be allies because of that privilege. So I easily could have stayed up north. I'm so happy to be home. Like, Memphis is in my heart, and I'm glad to be back. But a big reason why I was okay with moving home was because I knew when I was growing up, I never saw like a perceivably queer couple like in public. It just wasn't something that I saw. Our Pride is pretty awesome. The Memphis Pride is so much fun. I didn't get there until I was 18 because no one in high school talked about it. And so I think at the beginning I did say, like, I defend the South. I love the South. I think that there are some really incredible people here, but there's an accessibility issue where when you are in the South, there is some, I don't know if it's a translation where like, because there are so many churches on every block, people don't want to post posters about events, or like there is a genuine accessibility issue. And so I think when we talk about responsibility, it's people like me who, like, the only reason I would ever get attacked on a street is because I'm a woman. That's like my only identifier that I can see actively working against me. And that doesn't happen that often because, I don't know, 2020, maybe it's a little better. I'm not going to say, I take that back. It happens plenty often, but you know what I'm saying? Like, I have one identifier that is visibly making me a target, right? And so it's folks like me who are in a better position that need to come back and be visible and like not force other people to also be visible, but to those who have overcome violence or trauma, to be the people who come back once they feel they can. I think when we put responsibility on people who are still working through that, who might never work through that, that's messed up. I was gonna say a curse word, and I don't know if we're allowed to do that. Super messed up. And that's something that we're talking about all of the time with Black Lives Matter and a bunch of other really important movements, is like, it cannot be the responsibility of the people who are going through this to create the systemic change, because you can't like, you can't break down a master's house with the master's tools, you know, like this, it's not going to work that way. And the South is a really good example of that, I think, of people needing to infiltrate spaces where we can, because we know that we will be safe in them, and start like convincing people that human rights matter, that no one should get attacked leaving a bar, you know, like, I don't know. I went on my train has left and has gone quite far away from me, and I apologize. But that responsibility question is something I'm really passionate about.
Can I respond to that?
Certainly.
Okay. I mean, I really feel what you say, and I mostly agree with you, but I'm going to push a little bit, just because I have struggled with this idea that it's not my responsibility to change the system, that it's not my responsibility to use the tools that we have. And what we have is the master's tools, right? So I think that for me, something that I do, and I do this when I teach, is I reconfigure the tools, right? I take it on my shoulders, and I put it on my shoulders, because if I don't do it, and if we're all running around with the mentality that it's not my responsibility, then slowly it just goes down the ladder to even more marginalized people who have no choice but to fight, right? So for me, I do believe that it is my responsibility to change the system. And I believe that I do that when I take that hammer, and instead of nailing a nail to the wall, I like beat up someone in the head. You know what I mean? And that's of course something that I would never do, but just repurpose the tool. And I'm just saying this with love, because I'm here with you, Jill. I'm like here for what you're saying. But I guess I'm at a point in my life when I've realized that if I don't save myself, nobody else is. And so I don't want to put that responsibility on the baby queer, you know, that I see myself in, you know, when I was 18 and I was trying to find someone in that South to fight for me, so that I didn't have to mimic and fight and completely reconfigure who I was to fit what was acceptable, you know, to gain mobility in that way. So it's a push, but it's with love. I hope it comes across.
It does, and I completely appreciate it. I think what I was meaning was more like, white cisgender people need to be vocal, because sadly, so many people are only going to listen to us in certain spaces. Like, I need to go talk to my like grandma, who's probably going to vote for Trump again. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's my responsibility to do that. And I can only imagine that it would be exhausting to wear that on yourself all of the time. That's what I meant. I definitely don't want like white people going on and speaking for, or like cisgender people speaking for trans people. I hope that comes across.
It does. Thank you.
Wow, that yeah, thank you for all of those kind of layers of responsibility, and also thinking too about like what's kind of the danger even beyond the physical in going to other places. That was something that came up for me in the chapbook that Dedrick mentioned. It was thinking it's poetry that uses a couple primary source texts and kind of mashes together capitalism and kind of the laws that originated how the land in the United States was broken up, and so that includes the land in Appalachia, and thinking and processing that through meditations and my own kind of writing processes and performances to think about where my migration story connects in with migration stories of capitalism, kind of as a fundamental level, and especially well, most immediately coming to New York, I think going to Philly was a really sweet move in a lot of ways, because there's such a warm community there in the arts, and so many layers that arts community is preserving of local history and community history, that is really outreaching and embracing, and I just kind of felt that immediately. There was a lot of room to kind of grow and relax, and it has a different pace. It feels slow. I think it's that kind of sense of time. Then when I came to New York, this was just over a year ago. It's been a wild year to move to the city here. And it was terrifying. It was terror is the kind of emotional taste that I have on this neighborhood that I moved to in Queens. And it's this terror of capitalism and just not having money and not being able to find work. And I freelance, so I can't get on, I couldn't get unemployment, and just, it was just all of these layers. But at the same time, I felt like I was closer to this. So the speed of it felt really intense, but then I felt like I was also closer to the source of capitalism. And for me, that just feels like for me something that is working in my body and that I get to engage with. So I think that there's like a lot of that kind of personal, like what are you getting by moving and arriving somewhere. So a lot of that chapbook is kind of visiting those feelings in my body, and also visiting that migration story. I have a lot of questions about my own origins in Appalachia, and that's something I dig into more in my writing. But yeah, what brought, on my mom's side, we go back in the hills. I have a picture of my great grandmother, and she's standing in a dirt road with rabbits in her hand and like a shotgun in the other, and it's just such a delightful take on gender. And but also, my mom would always say, whereas, if something's really old, it's old as the hills, and it's been there, as long as the hills. And that's um, that's the way that I was raised. That's an interesting feeling, but that's not totally true. That's not true at all. And how we actually got there, that we went there to extract capital from the land, and that drove us across the ocean and to the mountains. And then that's driving me still to go to the city where there's an art industry, and I participate in that, and I need to be thinking about what am I participating in capitalism, in an extraction, and in migration. So that's all. Yeah, I think that's all to say. Those are kind of some terms that I'm thinking about. Migration and my identity.
Thank you so much. Jeff, would you like to, as a person who's firmly rooted in your home there in Blacksburg, well, you have a commute, but as a firmly rooted Southerner, what would you like to add in terms of this notion of metronormativity, how we deal with our place in our writing and our responsibility?
Well, in terms of responsibility, when I came back from that very brief sojourn in DC, I felt responsible to be openly gay in these little towns. It helps to be a big white guy with tattoos and a lot of facial hair. And I now have since Trump was elected, I now have a concealed carry license. In my last book, I have an essay called "Watch Out, That Queer's Got a Gun." I never thought I would end up carrying a gun. I was not interested when I was a young man. So at any rate, I feel fairly safe. I live in a little town 45 minutes from Blacksburg, which is not much bigger than the little town I came from. Blacksburg's too busy for me. There's too many people. There's too much traffic. We're back to the misanthrope. I live in a little town out in the middle of nowhere, and I'm married, and John and I have never had any problems. All of our neighbors know that we're gay. The little produce place that I go down the hill to get hillbilly delicacies is run by the mayor, who's gay. I feel perfectly comfortable here. And that's saying a lot, considering how frightened and tentative I was in the late 70s, realizing that I was gay in Hinton, West Virginia, a town of 3,000 people. So there have been some changes that have been good in this region and in me. And plus I've gotten lots of fodder writing about this stuff. So there you go.
Thank you, Jeff. You do have us all chasing you down for writing. I met Jeff through another book that he was in from one of my former KSU professors. Yeah, one thing I hear in terms of responsibility, or it's actually what I'm thinking about. And growing up in LJ in North Georgia, it was a tourist town. So, you know, there were lots of little cute restaurants, and there was an art gallery that opened. And the art gallery was owned by two gay men, and this is, you know, the late 90s. And simply because they existed, and because they went in public together, and because there were rumors that they were gay, it forced my parents, like, not that they were like afraid to, because I have fairly liberal parents, but it forced my parents, or put them in a situation to acknowledge to their child that gay people exist, simply because those people, Damien and Morris, existed in my neighborhood, in my small town. So whether that was their responsibility or not, I'll leave it to the panel, but it was a gift. It definitely was a gift. I'm looking at the time here, and we need to roll along. I want us to think a little bit about the specters. I heard a little bit from Marie about the specter of capitalism, which is kind of looming always. But I think that we have particular queer specters and particular Southern specters that we carry with us into our art. I know the longer I'm away from the South, the more Southern I feel, and the more I see the South bubbling up in my writing and in my art, and the more important it becomes. And Jeff, I'm going to start with you, because I know one of the things, a ghost in your work, is the Civil War. That's not the only thing you have to talk about, but that is one thing I know is a theme that comes up for you. So could you talk a little about how you handle these hauntings metaphorically in your work?
Well, sure. So let me see how the easiest way to put this. My father's mother's maternal grandfather was a Confederate soldier. And so I've written quite a bit about the Southern white experience in the Civil War. I'm sure that it's given many people a great deal of offense, but this is my identity. And so I have written 2 historical novels from the point of view of a Confederate soldier who falls in love with a Yankee prisoner of war. I have a book called Rebels, a book of poetry called Rebels, which is about all the Civil War battlefields that I went to with my husband. So there's this strange mixture of Confederate history and queer experience that I don't see very often anywhere else. So it makes me feel somewhat unique, I suppose, and that's always nice, because Leos like to feel unique, because we hope that will get us attention, because that's what Leos are really interested in. And I've also written a couple essays about that juxtaposition. So yes, that's certainly something that I've wrangled with all my life. The fact that my in-laws are Black and I have a biracial nephew makes things even more interesting. And I have worried about him considerably because of all the violence that has occurred, which has called, well, the Black Lives Matter and all that. I remember going to Memphis to the Civil Rights Museum and getting him a Black Lives Matter magnet. And he lives in that hometown of mine. Luckily, my sister is a lawyer, and I don't think anybody's going to mess with him while he's in Summers County. I worry about him. Well, yeah, I worry about him. So that's a very complicated palette there, as you can see.
Thank you, Jeff.
Sure.
Your beard is your lion's mane.
I guess so. Usually I have little Viking beard beads in it because now I'm writing about the Viking age and I'm queering that. So that'll be my next fiction. My next book, hopefully, will be the first of a trilogy of Viking novels with lots of sex and shield maidens, because I'm an honorary lesbian from college. Almost all of my friends are lesbians. In fact, I don't have any male friends anymore because I had a drag queen friend who died a couple years ago. So, well, at any rate, there you go. That's enough for me.
Who would like to jump in? I didn't post this question. So we're thinking about the specters that haunt our work. And those can be, I'm thinking particularly of Southern specters and queer specters, but it really could be the ghost of whatever haunts you.
Of anything. Well, to come off of what Jeff said, he brought up, zodiacs, and whenever you do that, I always, my ears always, jump up at that. Me being a Cancer, one of my themes that always come up for me is it has to do with family and enmeshment. The idea of enmeshment, because I grew up in, it's funny because I grew up in what would be considered, the hood in New Orleans. I'm from the 9th Ward. I'm from an area where, in the 90s, it wasn't uncommon to hear, gunshots or something going off in the streets. And I had a mother and a grandmother who, in a sense, were very protective of me. Sometimes I think a little bit too protective. And even though I saw a lot, as I said earlier, I mentioned like the sexual energy in the city and like a lot that they weren't able to protect me from. I feel like sometimes I missed out on a few of the things that, a few of the experiences, whether they be queer or from the perspective of being a Black man, of being Black in the South. A lot of those experiences I missed, and I didn't experience a lot of these things until maybe like my late teens or early 20s when I moved away. So, so a theme that always comes up for me in my work is enmeshment and the idea of family being so connected to you that it sort of hinders you from growth or from self-realization, because you're so enmeshed with your family that your identity becomes that of your family and not of your own. So that's definitely one of the, and you guys will see in this story that in the book, there's a character who deals with that sort of situation with his mother a little bit. And yeah, so that's definitely one of the things that comes up for me.
I'll jump in real quick and I'll just say that for me, and I think this is hopefully at least a little bit obvious from the piece that I wrote, for me, it's the gender binary. Hypermasculinity, sort of like and this speaks a little bit to something that Jill said earlier about feeling unsafe as a woman. For me, one of the things that I've done throughout my life to feel safe, it's like hide anything feminine about me. And so I've done this thing in my mind and in my head that's like literally push anything feminine about me to the back and make it private, and everything that is very masculine, hyper masculine, sometimes toxically so, comes to the front. And I tend to be very dominant in spaces, and it's something that I've had to do, because when I was outwardly female and very obviously feminine, nobody listened to me. They called me a dumb blonde. I grew up with my friends calling me a dumb blonde. I'm like, well, I'm getting a PhD now. What are you gonna do? So it's like it's like one of those things that for me, I'm always struggling, and I'm always in tension with my gender and what that means, and trying to not quite decide. That's not what I'm trying to do. I don't want to just be like, okay, I'm going to be male, I'm going to transition. I don't quite want to go back to being that very hyper feminine woman that I was in college. It's more about trying to find a way to like meld that together, and that comes across in my fiction. And I think that is I'm not going to say that it's particular to the South or particular to Puerto Rico, but coming from a place that's very machista, right? Very sort of rooted in that kind of patriarchal thinking and like the man rules. Like one of my alter egos is King. I literally ask people, just call me King for a while. Like I need to feel the power. And so that's sort of what comes across for me sometimes in my writing, is that sort of tension that I'm really trying to work through. And I can't quite arrive ever. But I would say that that's my specter, for better or for worse.
I think gender norms haunt every space, but I think the South, and I think the South has a particular kind of gendered haunting and gendered expectations, and I know that there are different racialized gendered expectations as well. And I see you moving from one set of expectations to another, and it's tough. Well said, thank you. Jill.
I think hypersexualization looks a little different in the South too. Again, not that it doesn't happen up north, because everything happens up north. We talk about it more for some reason, I don't know. But I don't know if I've said this, I identify as bisexual. And so that's weird, because you don't feel straight enough and you don't feel gay enough. And it's like, it's a whole thing, because half the population doesn't think that you're real. Anyway, a lot of the book that I wrote is a collection of narratives, and multiple people that I interviewed brought up this idea of hypersexualization and not wanting to come out because it immediately gives people this look into your sex life, because so often queer identity is directly connected to sexual identity, which makes sense. Like, and some people are super sexual and we should celebrate that, but there are also people who like are just romantically attracted to people, and people who like are pretty vanilla about everything and just are like a woman who wants to be with a woman, and that is also wonderful. And it gets really difficult, I think, to have conversations. So much of the South, we've got, again, I'm in the Bible Belt, and a lot of these conversations have to happen with like older church people who I'm trying to convince to like vote so that my friends and I can keep our rights. And it's really weird trying to walk this line of explaining that what they are concerning themselves with is kind of what's happening in like my bedroom spaces and like my romantic life, and people shut down with conversations like that immediately. And it doesn't have, like, old people constantly are like asking me like how my romantic life is if I'm with a man, but it's disgusting and too much and pornographic otherwise. And I think that's really tough. And that's definitely something that comes up with every single person that I talk to about these things, is because our particular identity can involve sex so intricately and so much. And that's why people are scared of the idea of fluidity too, is like not being able to peg what someone is in the bedroom freaks people out. in a way that isn't their business. It's the same with gender. And I think that that's the big one that I carry with me all the time, is not knowing how to have those conversations when the South is so ashamed of sex in a way that, other than New Orleans, gosh, I wish I had grown up there. That would have been awesome. I love New Orleans. But yeah, it's when you can't even talk about sex, how do you talk about LGBT people like we're people?
Thank you, Jill. Yeah, I was actually talking to when you said that about, as soon as you tell someone you're queer, they're thinking about what you do in the bedroom. I had just had that conversation earlier today with my partner, so I had to turn around and look at him on the couch, and he was like, it's true. So thank you for that. Yeah, I think there is this fear and stigma that around coming out, because people are automatically going to ask you if you're gay men, who's the woman, which isn't that misogynistic, but it's a very real thing that still happens. Marie, would you like to share anything on this question about the specters that haunt our work?
Yeah, I think I think for me it's, maybe I'll add the metaphysical, or like what I was doing to survive spiritually, maybe. You know, when I was being raised where I didn't know you could be trans. Like, I knew in my body, and didn't, like, was removed from any kind of queer example, or just anything like that. And so it just nothing was physically there for me. So I feel like, I mean, there was a point in my adolescence where I died. Like, I dissociated from my body for an entire week, and kind of entered like a specter world, entered another, this. And so I think what kind of heals me from that experience is maybe putting, like, really contending with what's physical and what's spiritual and what's metaphysical, and trying to find ways for myself to put those things back together, and to kind of feel it as a whole. And I think that kind of is pushing back also against like fundamentalist Christianity that relies on text. And so that's part of what I try to reach for in my performance work, and why I kind of work across disciplines. But yeah, a lot of it is kind of looking at that specter and kind of seeing how I can stitch that back to my body, and feel that as whole. I think that's probably the best way I can put it.
Marie, thank you so much for your vulnerability there. I'm astounded by this notion of the specter of ourselves, and your beautiful words of stitching it back to your body. Working with Eli over the summer from operating system, they worked a lot in our class on embodiment. So it's something recently because of Eli that I've given a lot of thought, and I think you've said something quite beautiful there. It's moving. And on that note, I want us to move to our end session here. If any of our panelists have prepared a short piece or anything they would like to share, I would like us to end on some hope, on some beauty. We gathered here as artists, as queer folk who make beautiful things to heal the world. And so my panelists, if you would like to share, you are invited to do so. So whoever would like to go first. Marie, you look really excited.
Oh my God, this is the part I've been waiting for to read and to hear everyone's work. Yeah, so I'm happy to read to start. This is like 3 minutes worth. Is that like a decent amount of time, do you think? Okay, cool. And this is one that I wrote. I'm really excited to read this because this month we've got 2 full moons. This is a blue moon coming up, and I wrote this back in April, kind of in the middle of the pandemic. But I also think it kind of gets to the feelings of putting that specter in my body and like looking for spirituality of my own together. So and touches back on my place where I came from. So this is called What the Moon Has to Say. Last night I opened the window for the full moon. It shimmered and shook, blue and white around its edges, talking to me the way the moon talks. I'd never heard it before. Before I saw with my eyes and heard with my ears. In my kitchen, the back window of the house, the moon comes up along from the south and east, radiant. It also falls into my bedroom. I held a white lid to a plastic bin to catch the narrow cut, becoming glowing, falling, filling the room a silver catch puddle. One time a tree talked to me. I was walking on the hilltops with my mom along a dirt hiking trail on this side of the fence. Beyond pasture, full of fog, a wet fog. And it wasn't the little tree alone that I took a picture of. It was the taller tree alone in the field, a pine full and form in the late fall. Walking on Rocky Knob with my mom, where my grandmother wanted to be. This is a year after we gathered here to scatter her ashes. Now this pine begins to turn, the way the world turns as I walk. The tree begins to turn, but faster, with more steady force than normal. I watch it turn as we walk. I don't say anything to my mom. It turns as I watch, like it was shoulders and torso wrapping around. The tree was saying hello, saying it saw me, moving with me, turning its face to me, turning its face unlifted, coming away against the gray ground of fog. The moon talked to me too. I opened the top of the window and laid down on my back in the kitchen, the fridge whirring and blowing in my ear. It touched me, the moon did, between my heart and stomach. I shook, the early April chill rolling down from the window. I shook from that spot between my heart and stomach. The moon made its way, shivering itself along in splashes of blue and white. Up the window as its touch moved from my face down through my heart. Finally, looking down, I felt the light crossing off my body. The full Libra moon said in action, a way of moving in the sky and a way of moving in my body. As the moon turns, so the seat between my heart and stomach turns too. I'm grateful to know how the moon talks as I hold its light in the lid of a plastic bin, and then I tell myself to go and rest. Thank you.
Marie, thank you. It's beautiful. Any panelists?
I would go, but my dogs are fighting right now, so I'm gonna wait till they calm down.
It's just like my mom on the phone. You're gonna have to hold on. The dogs are fighting. Oh, no worries, no worries. Carly, Jeff, Kyle, would you all like to jump in?
Are we just reading from our piece?
You can read anything you want. You got about 3 minutes of read time.
Okay, I'm just going to read a section of my piece because it speaks to the part of my identity that I kind of privilege above any other part of an identity, which is my intellectual identity. I've come to discover that when I'm looking at my pyramid of identity, that one's at the top, and then everything else, depending on how I feel that day. And also because I think you wanted to hear a little bit about joy, and my piece kind of is a little dark, but there's this part about joy, I guess, that I'll share. It's very short, very short. All right. I arise from the bed, which occupies a third of the studio apartment the theorists and my eye share. The stars would be so beautiful if the city noise didn't make them look so dull. I go to the bathroom and throw water on my face. I avoid the mirror because some days I don't know myself, and today is one of those days. I sit on my toilet, Blanco. Yes, my toilet's name is Blanco because it is white. To shit, because lately shitting is the only thing that brings me joy. While I do my thing, I look out the window and stare at the vines. Their green leaves are dancing with the wind. I seriously consider the possibility that the opposite of pleasure is its absence. I think yes, and commit to construct a rhetorical equation that will prove me right, even when I am wrong. In this country, even the culture is contagious. This revelation triggers a laughing fit, which is a little pathetic, but it brings me pleasure to laugh. And I decide then that I will do it more often. And then I set way into thinking about turkeyness, which I'm not going to get to, but I hope that you'll buy the book and read about it because it's a very Puerto Rican term. Thank you.
Lovely. That makes me smile so much.
I've been rescued. My partner took the dogs away.
Very good.
So I haven't written poetry in a long time. I really appreciate y'all's work. That is so beautiful. My little excerpt is going to sound very different because this is just the letter that I wrote to the readers at the end of my book. Again, it's a collection of different interviews that I did, so it's creative nonfiction. Dear reader, seek out experts, be safe, make room. You are deserving of community and of peace. The voices that make up this collection do not assume to recognize you, but hope to encourage you to share your own stories. Your joy is your resistance, and there are those who hope to help you discover each little piece of yourself and how these multitudes layer beautifully together. The LGBTQ+ revolution isn't coming in the future or waiting on anyone in particular, but is made out of us. We determine now how our generations will be seen, how and when we will include one another. Your additions to the community, even simply accepting and celebrating yourself, makes this space, this movement. Who will you be? Who and how will you love without shame? Yours in learning, Jill.
I wish someone had written me that letter. Beautiful. Kyle, Jeff.
I can go first, or Jeff, you can go first. It doesn't matter.
You go right ahead.
Okay. Well, what I'm reading is really just an excerpt from the story that that's in the book, and it's basically just it's a section of the story that I think is very important when we talk about, like we talked about earlier, the way that we perceive our discrimination or racism or pain, basically the way that we experience pain, and how that pain translates into something different for each person. And this part of the story is where the character experiences pain, but he is made aware of the pain that the person who inflicted pain upon him is feeling. So yeah, I'm just gonna read it. My mama goes to bed early on Sunday nights because she has to get up at 5 in the morning for work on Mondays. It was 9 in the evening, so the sun had already gone down almost an hour ago. The best weapon I could find was the bat that my mama kept under her bed. I grabbed it and walked out of the front door. My feet and heartbeats were in sync. I was incredibly afraid and anxious, but angry enough to keep moving. Tiger had upset me beyond my own understanding, beyond my own understanding. As I hurried towards the house, my mind began to race. I didn't want to think too much. I just wanted to allow myself to react for once. But I started to think about the gunshots that sometimes go off outside the window in the middle of the night. I could always hear my mama giving me a speech about how stray bullets don't have no names on them. I don't know why I was thinking about this right now. Maybe it was because I was fearful that one of those bullets would hit me as I made my way through the night, humid, sticky night air. The bullet never reached me, but I reached Tiger's front steps. I could feel my throat tighten as my heart started to beat faster. My knees rattled like chains in the attic of an old home, and my face was fixated on this front door as if I had seen a ghost. What do I do now? Should I just knock on the door and smash his gorgeous face in with this bat as soon as he opens it? What if he does not open the door, but someone else does? Should I ask for him? I had not thought this all the way through. It seemed perfect before. I would grab the bat, walk out of my front door, go to Tiger's house, and hit him with it. Why did this have to be so hard? I was jolted out of my thoughts by a sudden thump, followed by a loud smack coming from inside the house. Suddenly, the door flew open, but was slammed shut almost as fast as it opened, as if someone had tried to get out of the house, but was pulled back before being given a chance to escape. I ducked down beside the steps that led up to the front porch. I crawled around to the side of the house where there was an open window. I stood up and peered through the square, gridded openings of the box fan that sat inside the framework of the window. Behind the spinning blades, I saw Tiger. Tears ran down his cheekbones. His face was twisted in pain and trepidation as he stood against the wall and held himself like a battered child. A huge, burly arm revealed itself from behind the revolving blades and landed right in the center of Tiger's face. He wailed as he took hold of the coffee table to prevent himself from hitting the floor. The body of the beast revealed itself large and threatening. He hovered over Tiger as he sobbed. He reached out and grabbed Tiger's body again, swinging him around and pulling him closer so that their eyes could meet. You think you're a fucking man, the beast growled. You ain't nothing but a little faggot. A woman then sprinted toward him from somewhere beyond my view and attempted to attack the anonymous beast from behind, but was quickly mauled with one incredible swing. Now look what you done made me do, the beast howled, his voice nearly vibrating the window pane and making the box fan shudder. Growling inaudibly, he darted toward another part of the house with his huge hands gripping the top of his head and slammed the door shut. The women cradled Tiger in her arms for a minute and sobbed as blood trickled from their hammered faces. I couldn't watch anymore. I felt foolish standing there holding my mama's bat. I stood there in the tiny alley between Tiger's house and the other shotgun house that was right next to it. I stood there frozen in my tracks for much longer than I realized, trying to process everything I had just seen. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you.
That's pretty intense. Thank you. I'm going to read you a poem called Country Kids, which is about teaching. And it has some hope at the end, which is unusual for me since I'm kind of a depressive. But so, Country Kids. Other than those students courageously, openly queer, they are my favorites, the country kids. They hail from Wytheville in West Virginia, Woodstock, Southside, the Blue Ridge, the Shenandoah, the hills of Craig, Pulaski, Botetourt, and Giles. With their muddy cowboy boots, chunky belt buckles, trucker caps, blessedly impeccable manners, Southern vowels slow and broad as mine. Boys with their bushy, handsome goatees, girls with their big hair and tight jeans, telling tales of four-wheeling and deer hunting. the time some well-off snot from the DC suburbs made fun of their local accents, calling them ridge runner or hillbilly. I am less than the slick, urbane professor they might expect. Loafers, ties, corduroy. With my own camo baseball caps, cowboy duster, scuffed boots, and rebel beard, eager passions for Southern food and pickup trucks. I am more than the mountain man I appear, joking about my lust for country music star Tim McGraw, mentioning my husband of many years, explaining what the bear paw and lambda tattooed into my left biceps signify. Southern Baptist and right-wing Republican, many of them might be, yet we feel so much at home together that they bring me ramps and deer jerky, creasy greens, kudzu jelly, raspberry moonshine, all the rural delicacies that delight the redneck heart, gifts of a shared and honest fondness that might turn toward change, quietly political. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Beautiful and hopeful. All right, we are over time. I would love to take questions, but I want to make sure that we do give people some Zoom rest. I know that our whole lives take place on Zoom now. I've thrown all the contact information for me into the chat. So if you want to direct any questions that you would have directed at the panel, send them to me and I will send them to people's emails privately, and then they can respond to you. So I'll make sure that happens if you have questions. And I do just want to say one last time, thank you so much for coming. Thank you to the panelists for contributing to the anthology that I believe is going to be amazing. And thank you, Greg, thank you, Donnie, for always being a space, even when it's not a physical space, you make a space for all of us. Thank you. Thank you.
You are so welcome. Dudrick, when is the book coming out? Do you know?
So as long as I can stay on track, it will come out in January. So wish me luck.
I do wish you luck.
Cool.
And maybe we'll have another event at that point.
Hey, yes, I hope so. I hope so. Lovely. Anyone who wants to stick around for a second or two, we can talk. But otherwise, I'm a teacher, so I have to say. So.
And we'll post this recording on our YouTube channel. So if you know anyone who missed this and wanted to be here, they can check that out. Thank you all so much for coming. Please check out our website, bgsqd.com, and you can see future events that are coming up. And write to us if you have ideas for events or books, or you just want to say hi.
And I would like to close as a fellow Southerner to say that you have all affirmed me tonight. And the mixture of conflict and joy and identity struggles, no matter how sure I am of myself, everything that you shared tonight, you tapped into something. So thank you.
Absolutely. And before I leave, I just want to see if you can finish this phrase. My grandma and your grandma was sitting by the bayou.
You are making me sing Aiko Aiko, okay?
Yeah. There you go, Aiko Ane. All right. I just wanted to say you do it.
Oh my gosh. I'm gonna have to pull out my Mardi Gras compilation and play some Big Thief.
I have to leave, but this was so lovely. In Puerto Rico,
Yes.
we kiss. So I send you a kiss to all of you.
I take it. Thank
I
you.
look forward to hopefully being in conversation with you again at another time.
Oh yeah, I'll keep pestering you.
Take care.
I don't leave anyone alone.
Take care.
Good night, everyone. Don't forget to vote.
Oh, don't worry.
Did it yesterday. Biden 2020.
I think we're preaching to the choir, eh?
That's what we do.
I don't think you come to this event if you're undecided. You know what? I think I'm going to go to that queer Southern event. That'll really let me know who to vote for.
Good night, everyone.
Night,
Bye,
night.
y'all. Thanks,
Fun season.
everyone. Thanks, friends.